think we'll just go ahead and get started. I now call to order the regular scheduled meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Notice of this meeting, the time, the date, the place, and the agenda was given as a public notice on December 31st, 2018 in the Aiken Standard. Notice to contiguous property owners were mailed, and public notice signs were posted on or before January 2nd, 2019. Notice was sent on January 18th, 2019 for posting on the city webpage and to the city clerk for posting on the Finance and Administration Building Notice Board and the Municipal Building Notice Board at least 24 hours before this meeting. Agenda sheets were mailed or emailed to interested parties. Now, as a reminder, it is unlawful for any person knowingly providing false information to this board, and that's according to Section 22-9 of the Aiken Municipal Code. Each infraction is a separate offense with a penalty of up to 30 days in jail and or a fine of $1,092.50. To the board, you have received copies of the November 27th, 2018 regular meetings. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes? I have a question to the city.
Yes.
On page 2, we indicated that the drainage from the city-owned property that is either leased or owned by the Girl Scouts, did we check to see whether or not the drainage was being contained on the city property, or does it spill over to the adjacent property on Dupree Street?
When we checked it out, it was fairly flat. It looked like, if anything, it was draining toward the rear of the property, kind of like the property adjacent to it, kind of sloped down.
Rear of the city property.
The rear of the city property down toward Coker Spring.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Nancy.
on the final page, the second to last paragraph, Board Member Dukes, I don't understand this sentence. Board Member Dukes noted her uncertainty about the aesthetic of the carport is alleviated by the Design and Review Board having oversight. That to me doesn't make sense. But what I was saying is that I didn't have any concerns since the Design and Review Board had oversight.
Do you want them to delete it or correct it?
Yeah, we can just amend that, yeah.
I don't understand it the way it's written. Okay.
Are there other corrections or additions? The chair would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the minutes of the meeting as amended for the by Ms. Dukes.
Second that.
It's been properly moved and second that we accept the minutes as amended. Are there any unreadiness? Any discussion? Seeing, hearing none, those in favor of the motion show by raise of the right hand. The motion is carried unanimously.
I'll take care of that. I'm sorry.
The final orders to the city.
Sending those
Thank you.
from your right.
That is all of the old business. We now move into new business. And first item on the agenda, you have an opportunity to replace me.
To replace you? Ooh, no.
The election of officers. We are required annually to select a president, vice president, and a secretary. And you've received the explanation of the election of officers. So at this time, the position of president is, the chair would accept nomination for the position of president.
I'd like to make a motion that Larry
Yes.
Ogletree be our president.
And I second the motion.
Are there any other nominations?
Trying to determine whether there's some serious discussion required around the nomination, but I think we're good.
All right, Brenda. I don't hear any discussion, so do we have any discussion? Those in favor of the motion, show by raising the right hand. Guess I have to vote for myself.
That's right, you do.
The motion is carried unanimously. Vice President,
I'd like to make a motion.
Nancy?
Judy Turner be our vice president.
I second that.
John second. Do we have any other nomination? Any discussion? Seeing, hearing none, those in favor of the motion show by raising the right hand. The motion is carried unanimously. Now, the secretary, the floor is open for the nomination of secretary.
Well, first I'd like to ask if Mr. Bland would be interested in running for secretary.
I would, and now, I believe at this point last year, our staffing situation in the planning department was kind of in flux. We were still recruiting somebody, so we have filled that position. She will be staffing a different board, so I've made myself available to staff this board on a more permanent basis from the planning department if you would have me.
Okay?
Judy?
I nominate Ryan Bland.
I second that motion.
Any other nominations? Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion show by raising the right hand. And welcome on a permanent basis.
Yeah, I think I've been listed as interim on everything we've had to sign so far, so.
That takes care of that particular item. We now have the dates, suggested dates for the board meetings this year. And I guess I asked the city to explain the oddball on their December 17th.
Right, so unlike other boards, you adopt your calendar. Normally, the other boards have just kind of a standing meeting set by the bylaws, but this is adopted by the board. So design review is first Tuesday, planning commission is second Tuesday, so that leaves usually 2 other Tuesdays. And so we looked at the calendar kind of similar to this year in that traditionally the December meeting was fairly close to Christmas, and so that was kind of foregone or noted as necessary. And then you would have 2 meetings in January. I believe that first Thursday was typically slotted in January, but then you'd also have your regular meeting toward the end of the month. Just looking at this calendar, we have again so the fourth Tuesday, which is a typical meeting, would be Christmas Eve. So you would kind of either have the option of foregoing that December meeting, moving it up a week, which is what you have on your calendar, your proposed calendar, or moving it to the day after New Year's on the 2nd. I'm not sure if any of those feel like a great answer, but we thought that if any of those were to be an option for the board, we presented the 17th as an option if you were to want to keep a standing meeting in December this year.
Mr. Chairman, I feel like the 17th is much better than January the 2nd. I think that's too close to New Year's to be comfortable with people.
It makes noticing kind of difficult too through the holidays and things like that. So kind of to the fairness of applicants, we try to be cognizant of that.
So instead of praying for rain, we pray for no applicants then.
Well, whatever it was, it worked in 2018.
Any further discussions on the suggested calendar for the 2019 regular meetings?
fine with the 17th.
As am I.
It's fine. No problem.
All right. The chair would accept the motion.
I move that we accept the 2019 regular meeting dates as noted.
I second that.
That John seconded. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor of the motion, show by raising the right hand. The motion is carried unanimously. Brendan, you voted?
Yes, I did.
Yes, thank you. The motion is carried unanimously. That ends that section of new business. I call your attention to application 19-93007. A petitioners are requesting a variance to section 3.4.2 of the zoning ordinance regarding side and rear yard setback for an accessory structure to permit the construction of approximately a 12 by 12 storage shed on property that is zone RS6 and is located at 746 Cherry Drive to the city. Has this been properly posted?
It has.
Any inquiries that you wish to share with the board?
We had one email that I distributed to you in support of the application, and staff has labeled that as Exhibit D for the record.
Thank you. Before we go into any further discussion, generally when I open up, I usually I want to make the statement that I omitted tonight, that anyone that wish to receive copies of today's proceedings, you may sign up on the sign-up sheet just beyond the double doors, or you may contact the planning department. When you address the board, we ask that you occupy the podium in front of us and state your name and your address. Thank you. Presentation.
Mr. Chairman, the subject property, as you discussed, is 746 Cherry Drive. It's about a 0.2 acre lot, generally near the intersection of Cherry Drive and Randolph Street. This is about a half mile as the crow flies northeast of the Pine Log and Whiskey Road intersection in the Woodland subdivision. The property currently only has a 1,600 square foot residence, and staff responded, our zoning official responded to, I wouldn't say it was a complaint, but it was a kind of an informational call that there was a structure under construction on the residence and whether it met setbacks. So our zoning official went out and looked at the property, and the approximate 12 by 12 accessory structure is about 5 feet from the side and rear property lines. The zoning code, section 342C1, requires a setback of not less than 10 feet from side or rear lot lines. There was a previous version of our ordinance that had lesser setbacks, but the 1999 version onward, 10 feet had been the standard. So that's when there's kind of a wholesale change in the zoning ordinance, 1999, 2000. The structure, if you go out there and look, is essentially in the same state that it was as we found it, not any notable change to it that we could tell. It is in the, I guess, the northwest corner of the property. So the property, I pulled up an air photo here, is kind of an irregular shape. All lots in this area, it's RS6 zoning for the entire area and subdivision, which is a 6,000 square foot lot minimum. These are some of the smaller lots allowed by our zoning ordinance. Most of them don't go down to the 6,000 square feet, but they're still relatively small, compact subdivision. And the subdivision does have a number of previous accessory structures that are less than the 10-foot setback from side and rear property lines. The staff tried to estimate what the impact of a full 10-foot setback on the side and rear property line would be. And we estimated, because the angle is kind of difficult, but it would be roughly somewhere between 14 and 19 feet from the back of the residence if required for the full 10 feet from both the side and rear, as best we can tell from measuring air photos on GIS, the Geographic Information System. So without anything else notable, I guess staff would be available for any questions, and your applicant is here this evening.
In your opening remark, you stated that the inspector went out as a result of a phone call
That's correct.
rather than just his normal inspection and issuing a stop work order.
That's correct.
Thank you. Question from the board to the city?
Yeah, just, all these exhibits, circled exceptions, my copies are so muddled, it's hard to really get a lot out of that, but would the, does the city see that there was probably at a minimum this many,
Yes. Yeah, there are a large number. Many of them you can tell by the type of structure it is that they likely predated. They're likely 80s and 90s structures. Admittedly, a number of these they're fairly small in stature, and so if there is a fence, have been difficult to verify from the right-of-way, which is kind of where we run into the issue with this actually section of the ordinance and being able to find things on patrol, so to speak, is that many times they can't be visibly seen from the right-of-way. Now this one, I think I have a picture of the one being constructed. You can actually, it stands up a bit more than just a handy house. They're actually constructing the thing out of, you know, so it's a little higher quality construction that it was in the middle of.
So I guess I'm understanding this right. They didn't apply through the city to build.
That's right. So that's the other issue that we run into commonly. Structures under 200 square feet don't require a building permit, and then some other structures under 250 square feet don't require a building permit, so they don't come through. That would be typically how we would see these for approval, other than just a phone call requesting information on where you can put an accessory structure. So those are basically the only two methods, other than actually catching somebody in the act of putting one in the wrong location, that we have of either approving or disapproving in our office an accessory structure.
When you got that phone call from this person, that was the first that you knew of any?
That's
being
correct.
built?
Yes.
Okay.
Does the size of this structure require a building permit?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, it was my understanding that I don't believe the building inspections division was going to require a permit for this.
Okay.
From what I saw, it appeared to me that the runoff would be contained on their property rather than overlapping over.
From the roof line, yeah. So the roof line was oriented in a direction. They do have 5 feet from the rear property line that the roof line would fall into, which is and the plat was kind of rough to see, but there is a drainage easement back there that it would be emptying into. On one side, well, both sides. I think the lot drains generally that direction. Most of those lots were designed to try to drain to that rear lot line and down.
so no letters in opposition?
No, we did not
No
have.
comments to the negative?
We did not have any letters to the opposition.
The left setback along the side of the lot, that's 5 feet off the corner of the structure,
Yes.
if I'm reading this correctly.
Right. So at the least distance, we believe it to be 5 feet.
So the rear corner is considerably more than
Probably a
5
bit
feet.
more. Yes.
I noticed in the staff write-up under B, the last sentence of the first paragraph indicated that this was the smallest, one of the smaller lots. And then when I looked at the general lots in the area, it happened to be one of the larger lots.
Right, I think that was, yeah, the applicant's response, and all the lots in the subdivision are roughly, other than the one on the end, are pretty close to the same size, but in their case, it might be, it's a little bit larger lot, but it is kind of more regular shape. Most of them are kind of squared off at the rear, so. It is probably maybe one of the smaller lots on that side of Cherry. Almost all the lots on the other side are nearly identical.
Very good, Brian. Do we have other questions from the board to the city? Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson?
I'm Kurt Peterson at 746 Cherry Drive.
Mr. Go ahead.
And I'm Leslie Peterson.
You have received copies of the staff report. Do you wish to embellish the report or just respond to and from questions from the board?
The only thing, you know, of course, we would prefer not to have to move the structure. The only one additional reason for my personal interest is that I've dug drainage underneath the timbers that support the shed. So if I have to move the shed toward the street, I would have to move the timbers off of it. I still have gravel, you know, spread over the whole, but I have deep drainage ditches under the timbers. So that would, I would basically have to abandon those as, you know, providing extra drainage underneath the support structure. But other than that, I have nothing. I think we put down in our summation pretty much all we had to say. So.
Questions from the board to the Petersons?
The question, Mr. Chairman.
Karen?
The drainage that you're referring to, are they like a French drain that dissipates the water, or does it take it towards certain?
I'm sorry, it's simply what I call it a ditch, so that you have deeper gravel underneath the timbers, so that water in the immediate vicinity of the timbers would drain further down into the ground. It would take a lot more rain to bring the water level up in the vicinity of the timbers.
Is that to handle the potential water running off of the roof line, or is it just because of the newer construction of the building? And is it to alleviate any impact of it running, you know, to the northwest to your neighbor's property?
No, the only intent was just to provide a greater distance between earth and the timbers themselves.
Okay.
You know, kind of a French drain, I
Sure.
guess. But I didn't have in mind, frankly, to divert the water in any direction, as much as just keep the timbers away from dirt. So,
Thank you.
if I could, I do have one more comment.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, we didn't intend to mislead the committee or the council on the size of our lot. I just knew that from our backyard, as I look down toward the northwest, the lots get slightly larger as you go down the road. So I've always just had that perception. You know, we got, you know, one of the smallest lots in our area. So.
Mr. Chairman. Also, though, your lot, because it is longer rather than wider, that makes it harder to place your building somewhere, too. It's a narrow way behind your house.
Our
Okay.
backyard is, to me, is very shallow.
Yes.
We knew that when we bought it.
So I have a question for the Petersons. certainly sympathetic. I mean, you're basically surrounded by what I would consider non-conforming buildings
Right.
everywhere around you. Not just down the street, but I think every one of your immediate neighbors has got one. Now, whether that was all done prior to zoning and all that would be difficult to get to. Issue I have is just the scope of the building. I mean, you got, I think your letter in support from Ms. Haynes calls it the premier garden shed. I'd have to second that.
Yes.
Why the mammoth, not so much the 12 by 12 footprint, but your roof is equal to your
Yeah,
home
it's-
roof, your home roof line.
It's standard construction. They're full stud walls, so, I have a lot of interests, and I have a lot of equipment that goes along with that, woodworking and motorcycling and fishing and, et cetera. So I just felt like if I'm gonna build something, I wanna build something I don't have to crouch in or, and the size of it, I personally felt that, I would rather have a 20 by 40 shed personally, but I know that's not,
Well,
I know that's not reasonable.
I appreciate your gusto there. If you're going to ask for a variance, you might as well put the Taj Mahal on there.
So, yes, I agree. It's unusually tall. It's a full, like I say, full stud wall shed, and I felt like a 12 by 12 was probably the maximum reasonable size considering our neighborhood.
I'm just, again, it would be difficult or, I know a challenge to have to physically move the shed. I just don't know what options you have to scale it back a bit. Could you comment on that? Are there any?
I would be very apprehensive to try.
Yeah.
Basically, I think if I were to scale, I would basically have to dismantle it.
Okay.
All the roof rafters are now in place, and I started shingling the
Okay.
roof, so it would have to be basically a dismantlement.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Personally, I think that, based on all the individual structures around the area, I think it's it's a positive move to the neighborhood. Because in his particular neighborhood, there's one right behind, there's one right beside, and there's one on the other side, and they're all, metal buildings, and this, to me, like I say, kind of adds to the neighborhood.
Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, I guess I have to make one comment. I detected your attitude in your response. Any further questions from the board to the Petersons?
This is not a garden shed, is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, it'll be it's solid. Yes, it's.
So this is like a, I don't know, I don't want to say a playroom, but
What do you plan to do with it? What do you plan to do with it is what that's the question.
Well, part of it is relieve some of the clutter in my garage, and all my garden tools. I have, things like a radial arm saw and a drill press and all the equipment of that sort. That's my intention, is that a lot of that I would move into that shed. And I've got, 2 workbenches in my garage right now. I'd like to have a large workbench in that shed that I could do woodworking on. And hopefully, at least my wife be able to get her car in we have a 2-car garage, but right now it's a 0-car garage, so.
in order for us to approve something like this, you have to meet, all the criteria. And due to the conditions, the application of the ordinance to this particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of this property if you don't get this shed. Could you explain how that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Let's say you were trying to build a garage. And without a garage, your car couldn't be, I don't understand why you have to have this shed and how it would restrict your utilization of the property if you didn't get it. Basically, you would not be able to have the space to do your hobbies.
Right, that's right.
But also, I think he mentioned he would like to have the car in the garage, and because of the amount of stuff, and I don't know whether you saw inside his garage, but it is full of stuff, okay? And in order to get a car in there, he would definitely have to move a lot of that stuff into the storage unit. Evidently, I got to see the whole thing, okay? So.
And then item D, the conditions are not the result of the applicant's own actions. I think this is a result of his actions.
Again, I almost have to disagree with that because the size, the property size and shape is so narrow that if you move the building away 10 feet and 10 feet this way, it's going to inhibit the use of the backyard because of the narrowness of it. It's long and narrow. The open space in the backyard is.
Do we have other questions from the board to the Petersons?
I have a couple more. Is
Go ahead,
Sandy Haynes the adjacent neighbor?
I'm the neighbor to the back. If you look at that picture, it's up there, I'm the one directly behind.
Okay, thank you.
743 Maple Drive, Southeast.
Karen, did you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, I actually had a question
Go
for
ahead.
the city that might
Sure.
pertain to. Prior to 1999, the setback was,
It was 7 feet, and I think it may have been even less prior to that, but back into at least, as far as I was able to chase down zoning ordinances history into roughly 92, 93, I believe at that point it changed to 7 feet. Now, from records in our office, there were a number of times that they simply, if the structure wasn't large enough to meet the minimum requirements of obtaining a building permit, they didn't strictly enforce that section at that time.
Right.
It's been since the 1999 code, which requires the 10 feet on either side, that it's been applied to all structures.
right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I guess, and it's not necessarily a question that they can answer, but perhaps in relation to the conditions are not a result of the applicant's own actions because they're dealing with previously, you know, it was a community that was built, just for lack of a better example, you know, Deodar today is built in such a way, there's an HOA in place and you have to apply through the HOA in order to build the buildings, and it's within, you know, the restrictions there. And now these are not in place in order to sort of police these structures, and they were less before. So they're sort of in a community that was built in such a manner to accommodate these structures at the time, and now it's sort of been backed up. But, you know, the smaller parcels, it doesn't bode well for people that want to have, you know, a little larger footprint, but don't want to move and spend more money on, you know, larger properties to accommodate these things. So I guess what I'm saying is sort of in response to, I don't believe that it is a result of their own actions. I think they're kind of in an unfortunate circumstance where if the Woodlands and the HOA was still active and alive, and obviously I think it was built in the 80s.
Yeah.
Back then, we'd get a little handy house and, you know, slap it on the property and make sure it was 7 feet off, and now times have sort of changed. I think it's, I know we're not really speaking to that restriction, that's not really our jurisdiction, but I think aesthetically what they're trying to accomplish is very considerate of the neighborhood. And my personal, I love cars in a garage personally in a neighborhood, and that's one of my pet peeves. So I think I can relate to being able to put one's car in the garage, again, aesthetically for the community. So if they're going to build a nice building and park their cars in the garage, I think I think that's a fairly strong argument for the exception.
Do we have any further questions for the Petersons? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have others to speak to the variance requests?
My name is Sandy Haynes. I live at 743 Maple Drive Southeast. My property is directly behind the Petersons. I have owned this property since July of last summer. It's been, you had talked about drainage and the issue with drainage. I just want to say that we are very lucky in our neighborhood to have very good percolating soil. We've had an awful lot of rain, and there is no problem that I see between my property and the Petersons as far as drainage is concerned. And I don't expect that this building, which has been erected and had a roof on it during all of these rains, is going to add to that. So I have absolutely no problem with you granting the variance to them. As I said in my email, it's compared to other structures, including the one on the property that I just bought, that was built in, the Petersons had lived behind when the people before me built that, and they think it's back in 2004 that my garden shed was built, and I doubt that I have a 10-foot setback from the property line. So I would feel terrible if the variance wasn't allowed for the Petersons to have this beautiful building they're building. I want him to build mine when mine falls down. So that's why I came tonight. And also, I'm a new neighbor, and I believe that neighbors should speak up for each other when it comes to these things. And originally, they thought I might have been the one that made the phone calls. So I was not. I have had no problem with this structure in its construction or its completion.
Any questions from the board to Ms. Haynes? Thank you very much. I have a question to the city, not asking for names, but the telephone call.
Yeah.
Basically, did it complain about size, shape, what?
I did not field the phone call as our zoning official, but it was characterized to me as more of an informational call than a complaint.
Oh.
That's the best I could characterize it as it was explained to me.
Okay.
And we have had some other issues in that neighborhood that people have come before here, and maybe it was somebody who had to come before us and wanted to make sure that the rules are being applied equally.
And so one more thing, Mr. Chairman, is that I believe there were a number of structures in this neighborhood that were issued administrative waivers. Generally, that is available for a condition like this. Typically, it has been, and I've just kind of followed the internal policies of my predecessor, that if it's based upon either a complaint or a phone call that, we just assume that there may be an objection to it. If there's an objection to it, it comes to the board. And so that's why that was not pursued in this case. It's kind of just following policy of the planning department back from when that administrative waiver process was established. So so that, just to remind the board how that process works, we would notify adjacent properties, not including properties across the street, and if they met certain requirements and there were no objections, then administratively staff can grant that waiver. And a number of the newer structures in that neighborhood, it appears, may have waivers.
Am I detecting that you would not be put out if we directed you to make an administrative waiver?
That would not.
I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Do we have others to speak to the variance requests? Final call, others to speak to the variance requests? Seeing, hearing none, the chair would entertain a motion so we can enter a period of discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Judy?
I ask that we accept application 19-93007 with the following conditions. Approval of a variance to section 3.4.2 of the zoning ordinance to permit a side and rear yard setback of 5 feet for an an approximate 12 by 12 storage shed on the property zone residential single family RS6 at the 746 Cherry Drive, TPN 122-06-21-010. That the final order is recorded with the Aiken County RMC office, and I feel that this should be approved because section C is that the size of well, maybe going to D, the conditions were not his own action. Of course, building the building was his own action, but trying to place a building in that particular size lot was very, very challenging. And I think that, that was, I think it's going to add to the property rather than taking away. And I also think that, like I say, there are just so many things that will help that property be utilized in a positive manner. And I guess y'all didn't see his garage, but let me tell you what, it is packed full of stuff, and there's no way a car could ever get in that particular spot. And if that's one of the actions, I think that would be good, and I think it's...
Would you save your comments for discussion, please?
Okay, I'll do that, yes.
Do we have a second to your motion?
I second.
John, second the motion. It's been properly moved and second that we accept, we approve the various requests. Do we have any discussion now, Judy?
Do you want more, man?
Yes. We're in a period of discussion now.
Okay, I'll let some other people then discuss that.
Normally, I would come down strongly on the zoning ordinance and support that. But in this case, I think there are some other circumstances, the size of the lot, the number of other sheds. There's more sheds than people in that neighborhood. The quality of construction is a consideration. It's more than just a place for hobbies. It's there's a need to safely and securely keep his tools and other his stuff. And there seems to be, there would be no negative impact on the other properties in the neighborhood. So for that reason, I would support this variance.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to contribute as well. I think should that building as it is be moved within the 10-foot standards, realistically, any neighboring property is still going to see the building the same way. It's just going to be sort of awkwardly placed more in the usable area of the yard. So to me, the setback seems a little off because it's not being, shielded from the neighbor's view or impeding anything. If anything, it's going to make the property sort of tidier as a whole and more useful, and I think lend itself aesthetically, to the neighborhood. His roof line's actually looking, when you drove by and looked at it, it almost looked like an extension of the house without that depth perception, which I thought was actually very smart. It made the house look like it was actually being built onto. So I think it's an asset, and for the community, I think it's going to set a standard too, where ironically, a lot of the people that had handy houses, not that there's anything wrong with them, but typically when they outgrew them, they added another one, which meant the first one wasn't big enough. And so it is again a plus to have one, albeit generous, but I think it does set a standard, hopefully, for the neighborhood.
Brandon, you're thinking.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I agree with Board Member Brecht and Daley. I think they are bringing up compelling reasons for exceptions. The only concern I continue to have is I don't know how this ordinance, before the board in terms of issuing future waiver. It'd be very difficult in good faith to ever, well, I won't say that, but to really consistently enforce this in light of the Wild West that neighborhood has already become.
Yeah.
So you really wrestled, is this the time to draw a line in the sand and really try to get things in order where at least the zoning requirement is set, or is that really an unfair burden on someone who's stumbled into it later in the developmental cycle? So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Nancy? No?
No comment.
No comment. I guess Brandon is leaning toward my way of thinking. And I like your term, draw a line in the sand. It's our charter to enforce the zoning ordinances unless by the criteria that there is an exception, clearly an exception from the ordinance due to some unforeseen circumstances. As I traveled the neighborhood, I think I, like the rest of the board, probably saw a lot of violations, And I began to think, how will I rule in this particular case? It's going to be difficult. Our job is to have the city comply with the regulations. And my suggestion is that we deny this variance request, but in deniance, we refer to the director to make an administrative decision on a waiver. Because on record, if we grant the waiver, then we are saying to the community that we are not going to enforce your regulations. But if you get us off the hook, I think you heard the discussion. I think you see where we are and the dilemma that we are in. I think we all sympathize with the condition. We saw the conditions. We see what the applicant is trying to do. We appreciate what he's trying to do and the way he's doing it, but he's in violation of the law. There's no two ways about it. But if we're looking for wiggle room, and
Mr. Chairman, I might be able to add to that just a little bit, is that one thing that is kind of difficult from the staff's perspective is that there is the administrative waiver process. And while it allows for, I guess something less than a variance, the fact that that exists with, I would say, some less stringent requirements attached to it than a strict variance request is required to meet, that is the typical route we would see unless we would get, if our zoning official had caught this out in the field without there being a call. Again, this is kind of more of a department policy that we're just following, that was established by my predecessors, that typically we would offer that up to them as the primary option first before, and then an appeal could come to the board. So essentially what you're saying is it would work the other way.
yeah, we're going to direct it back down
Right.
to an administrative appeal. So that would be my recommendation, my suggestion that we deny, but to redirect it back to the planning director for the administrative appeal process.
I can see your point, but I think that this is I think it's an upgrade to the community, even though it's the 5-foot area. I mean, what he's trying to do certainly is more appealing to the community, as far as I'm concerned, than having all the variable sizes and shapes and all that kind of stuff of the storage buildings.
The only precaution that I'm, in my suggestion, that I'm trying not the board go on record granting a variance, and what we do in the next case.
That's what we do, though, is it's a variance.
Yes or no, yeah.
I guess to be clear, is the city, I guess, working this thing in reverse back to an administrative appeal? Is that something that's, if this motion is denied, is possible for the applicant?
At this point, since it's already at the board, I think staff would have to receive direction from the board to have it essentially bumped down back to the staff review process. I think if you were to deny it, I think so. I think the administrative waiver is kind of the lower process. The variance is the higher process. I think there has to be a place that they could appeal an administrative decision to, and that is the board. So that's kind of the reason that I think it would have to get actually handed back down to staff.
I don't have a problem with it being handed back down to staff.
Okay, again, so I'm struggling what motion or what vote or what recommendation from this body needs to happen for that to happen.
Deny and referral back to the,
Okay.
We would have to deny it, though?
Yes.
We wouldn't just have to refer it back?
I think we have to deny it.
Well, that's what we're trying to get to. I think the city's indicating that there's going to be more than just a denial, correct?
That's correct. I would probably include it as a condition of the denial if you were to do that, although that would probably take an affirmative negative vote. So thinking through parliamentary procedure, just because, so if you were to deny, if the board were to deny the variance, that doesn't preclude you from making an additional motion.
Right.
So essentially you have a positive motion on the floor to approve. If that were to not pass, you still don't have an affirmative vote to deny either. So then that would leave you some room to make an additional motion in second if you were to choose to do so.
Wouldn't it just be cleaner to accept the request? I understand and I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I think we're kind of muddying the waters, and if we just accept the request as the motion is, it's going to be cleaner for everybody. I hear what you're saying and your concern, but I also think it's kind of a little...
My scientific background allows me to muddy the water, but put it through a filter.
Okay.
So, in terms of Brandon's question, denial with a motion to refer.
We'll vote on the motion as it is. I'm going to have to vote against it because it doesn't
fit the criteria.
It doesn't fit it, yeah. So that's why I have no problem with it.
Yeah. It doesn't, I'm sorry.
It doesn't fit the criteria.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm leaning that way as well. I would like to try to figure out some way to help the applicant, though. That's what a concern of mine is, that there's, but I think maybe we have we? Figured out a way to get it re-referred?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right,
Yeah.
well, let's go ahead with the vote then.
But it is a premier shed. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So asset to the neighborhood.
The vote has been called for. Those in favor of the motion show by raise of the right hand. Those opposed? We have a tie, and I guess I have to break the tie.
Not necessarily, it just means that it did not pass.
Does not pass.
That's right.
That may be a better.
Right, so,
Okay.
so you have a vote now that has not passed, and so without any additional action by the board, you have a denial.
That helps us out.
If you but you also have the ability to make another
Motion.
alternative motion.
Thank you.
In a second.
Your vote helped me out.
Who's going to make the motion?
Yeah. Judy?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we refer this impasse
Application. The application.
to the planning department to, what else do I need? to say?
Administrative just.
For to make an administrative decision.
Appeal. Yeah. Do we have a second?
Second.
Karen?
I'll second.
Karen, second. It's been properly moved and second that we refer this application to the planning department. Do we have any discussion? Seeing, hearing none, those in favor of the motion show by raise of the right hand. Motion is carried unanimously. With that, no other items on the agenda that I call for an end of the meeting, zoning board of appeals meeting.
All standard residential districts, anything that starts with an RS has the same requirement. Well, and commercial property. The only difference is in planned residential districts that allows a